Hello and welcome to The Game Changers, the podcast where you'll hear from extraordinary trailblazing women in sport. I'm Sue Anstis, a founding trustee of the Women's Sport Trust charity and the founder of Fearless Women, a company with a powerful ambition to drive positive change for women's sport. I'm delighted to say that this series of The Game Changers is supported by Sport England, who have done so much to tackle the inequalities women face across all areas of sport. From the wonderful This Girl Can campaign and initiatives that help shape school sport for girls, to schemes that encourage more female volunteers in the workforce, support female coaches and officials, and ensure more women from all backgrounds take leadership positions on the boards of our sports organisations. My guest today is the extraordinary Ebony Rainford-Brent, a former England cricketer, World Cup winner, sports broadcaster at the BBC and Sky, director of women's cricket at Surrey, motivational speaker and a podcast host. Is there no end to this woman's talents? I started the interview by asking Ebony if she could remember the first time she'd hit a cricket ball.
It was quite powerful for me because I was about 9-10 years old. I was at primary school and I loved football, so I knew nothing about cricket. I thought cricket was a weird sport. And I remember they said this guy called Tony Moody was coming in. He was a Jamaican kind of heritage guy, was teach cricket. But I remember being like, cricket? That's a bit weird. Like, what is that? What is it? And I was resistant. I remember being like, nah, I don't fancy it. One of my teachers was like, look, just give it a go. It's something different. You love football. Maybe try it. And I remember so clearly, like the first moment I hit the ball, it was like a plastic bat. We were on a concrete playing field and the orange ball flew out the cage. And I was like, wow. Like I was just hooked. I was hooked. So that was it really. Once I hit my first ball and I was running around with all the boys in the playground, that was it. I was in. I loved it.
And what do you think it was about it then? I think that sensation of hitting, but what else was it about the game as you started to play that you loved?
Yeah, so we played street cricket for a long time, so it's very different to sort of your traditional game. So it was so fast paced. But I think what was different is there were so many strategic things. So I remember just being like, right, if I want a wicket, I need to work this guy out. And it's different to football or basketball. Yes, there's strategy, but you're moving, you've got plays. I think with cricket, I was able to go, right, how do I want to get this kid out? Or where do I want to hit this ball? And I think it was the ability to, within a game, have my own individual sort of strategy. So then you're thinking constantly, right, what if I do this? What if I try and spin it? What if I bowl it faster? I just found that I loved the thinking process behind it. So it's a very strategic game, and you could pick that up even in street cricket very quickly.
That's really interesting. I've never thought of it from that side before. I've never played cricket. That's probably why, isn't it?
We'll get you there. We'll get you there.
You mentioned other sports as well, and you've obviously mentioned there basketball, but athletics and netball. And so, did you play lots of sports at school?
Yeah, so at secondary school in particular, I played netball, I played basketball, like English schools level. I played athletics, English school standard, squash. I played loads of sports, netball. I think the difference actually, there's one difference was, I remember there was a chance I could have possibly tried to creep into England basketball or England cricket as a sort of teenager. But there was a lady called Jenny Washrat who became my like mentor, and she had her mindset on making me a cricketer. Like she just did everything. She got me scholarships. She would drive me up to training all around the country. She was just amazing. So it was kind of her passion for keeping me hooked in the game that was the driver. Like I loved being around her so much, and she was just so supportive. And I think because it was financially tricky as well for mum, that extra help towards the cricket kind of made it like, all right, you know, there's someone investing in me and, you know, why not? So even though I had a lot of other sports I possibly could have kicked on with, a lot of those, it was cricket that ended up being the winner, I guess.
Can you remember at what point you knew you were really good and you had great potential?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say, I remember the first time I got an England junior letter. So I was 14. And I remember I got this letter which said, you've been selected to join England junior training. And then it was addressed to Ebony Rainford-Brent. And I went to my mum and I was like, Mum, they've got the wrong person, because I didn't think I was that good. And she was like, well, Ebony, I don't think there's any other Ebony Rainford-Brents out there. And so I would say even like playing in England teams in my junior years, I didn't really know I was good. I don't know if I ever had that as a sort of a thought process. What I would say is I mostly dedicated myself later to it after injuries because I was just so passionate about trying. But I don't think I ever had that thought process like, I am good at this. This is something I could thrive until much later, maybe even into my sort of early 20s. It just wasn't really a thought process for me.
Just enjoying it.
Mm.
And you grew up in Brixton, and family life growing up was difficult. Are you okay to talk about your brother and what happened there?
Definitely. Without going into too much detail, but I can give you sort of snapshot. We grew up in sort of Herne Hill way, Brixton, and I think it was those days, was early days of knife crime. So now I think it's maybe much more common, but then it was it was difficult. I was about 5 years old, and he was 16 at the time, and it was someone he knew through school and growing up, and it was just an argument between them. I think my understanding is it's over a girl that they were both interested in, and the guy planned, and stabbed him a number of times. And it's something that maybe I'm processed now as an adult. I think it's taken me a long time to process, but it's the sort of thing that happens within poorer communities. I think if people understand the sort of dynamics of what does happen and why it happens, it makes more sense when you're in it. But it's something that rocked us. It rocked me emotionally for years. I think sport was actually my release. It hit our family hard. I would say it's taken us till now, I would say, and that's a long time later, from 5 years old to kind of recover and process losing someone in such a tragic manner and so young. And I know it might not kind of relate directly to a lot of people's experience, but I think we've all had like a sudden loss sometimes, and a sudden loss in a shocking way it's really hard to deal with. So yes, it was a sad thing for our family, and something that I really feel for families who are going through that now, because I don't think you can get over those sort of experiences at all.
And family-wise, so you've got two brothers now. You're still close to as a family unit now, coming out?
Yeah, kind of. One brother's been inside for a long time. We haven't really had much contact. I'm not sure what he's up to now, but we're estranged as such. And then another brother I'm really close with, Dom. So we speak most days, and he's been most probably one of the, even though we argue, I don't know about you guys, like we have that sort of fiery sort of relationship, but he's also been, one of my biggest supports, buying me spikes when I needed it as a kid, through to helping me get my first flat. He's that sort of practical brother who just gets stuff done for you. So yeah, I've been really lucky to have him in my life.
And cricket's such a white middle class sport, in huge contrast really to multicultural city, really, where you grew up in Brixton. Did you feel like you belonged? You talked about street cricket initially, but as you moved into the more traditional format, did you feel like you belonged in the cricket world?
No, definitely not. And I mean, I've spoken more recently about my experiences. I never really felt like I belonged. It was such a different world. And I think the values, the experiences, my friends at home were everything: white, black, Asian, very diverse. And you never really had to think about your color. I never thought about my color in my home world, because everyone just understood everyone just by the nature of being in such a multicultural environment. And then cricket is very different. It's a higher socioeconomic class traditionally. It's white, and I was the only black girl the first black woman to play for England. So you just kind of went through, and I think, I've spoken about, there's been a mixture of experiences, which I mostly won't go into too much because I feel like I've exhausted myself recently talking about BLM.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've had some, I've had my racist experiences, which were difficult, which makes you feel more isolated and alone. And I maybe didn't have the confidence at those days to, speak up or challenge and things like that. So it was always how do you describe it? It's just always something that you felt like you felt it, and it was a lonely feeling of just not quite being part. But I did stay with the game. I love the game. I'm grateful now that I'm doing a lot of projects which is trying to look at making the game more diverse, because I think we need to make the game reach out more like football does, netball does, basketball does, athletics, even rugby, which was an elitist sport like cricket, has started to shift more. So, I want cricket to be one of those sports, because I know what it feels like to realise that there's a lack of difference in our game.
And why do you think more girls haven't come through the path in the way that you did? So obviously they came into your school, they inspired you, and you started playing. So why were there not more Ebony's that followed around your time, do you think?
So mine was complete pot luck. So the lady I spoke about, Jenny, she spotted me when I was about 10 by chance at this sort of competition where it was they had to have a girl. So I think I got roped in like to be the, come on, there's a girl, get her in. And she saw me at this. I remember her going to my mum and doing all the sort of selling. Come on, let's get her in. She got me into Surrey, etc. If you look at the pathways, which I'm starting to do a lot more work looking at, it's not connected from inner city to our traditional game. It's not at all. All the kids playing street projects. There aren't talent ID processes. There aren't academies which will help those kids move from softball to hardball. There's not enough investment. There's investment in grassroots programs in those areas, but the pathway is not linked up. And so for me, Jenny did all that. She did the hard yards. But I know from coaching, I remember going into Loughborough Junction, Mitesfield Estate, which is just down the road from where I grew up. And I would say the most talented girl I've ever seen in my entire life. I'd never played before. I asked her to pick up and do this throw. She threw down the stumps, like quick. She was quick. So I moved the stumps and I kept moving it back and back and back and challenging her, saying, go on. And she was hitting down one stump every single time. She'd never played before. And I remember speaking to her mum. Her mum had a number of kids, was working 2 or 3 jobs. And I said, look, I want to get her involved. And the challenge was the times of the training. The location was in Guildford, which is miles away. We tried. I remember us trying to make it happen, but without someone who could physically get the girl to the training, it was just too much for a mum with, all these other challenges. And so I think that's the problem with our game is that, whereas football is much more, you can play within your community and get better and there's opportunities on your doorstep. Cricket is just, it's more based around the traditional club. So, I'm doing a lot of work. Hopefully you'll hear in the next 6 months or so some projects that I'm working on because I feel that we can really break down those barriers if we invest in them.
Excellent. You do, and I feel you see this incredible women's teams from India and Pakistan, and yet in the UK, in the South Asian communities, we're just not seeing those girls coming through at all. So
yeah, massively. I'm going to stay optimistic and say the potential of growth is ridiculous. It just now needs the investment and the willing. And I think there is investment around the South Asian community, but then the other bits, it's like the willingness to want them. So I don't know if you've heard, we just started an ACE Academy at Surrey, which stands for African Caribbean Engagement Program. And we've gone out looking for diverse talent. Like we're looking for it and we're developing it. And I think you've just got to go looking for the talent and help them progress through.
Excellent. Well, good luck. We look forward to hearing a bit more of that in the months ahead as well. So I guess back to your playing, you suffered a big career upset at 19 when you were on that pathway. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened there?
Yeah, God, my back. Oh man, I would say it's one of the tougher experiences of my life, really. I went to an England trials it wasn't official trials, but I got called up to join the full England side. I remember being so like, right, this is my time to impress. I'm going to bowl fast. I was a bowler those days. I'm going to run in. I'm going to do everything charging. And I turned up and I bowled like a couple of balls and I was like, oh, my back feels a bit weird. But you think, just suck it up. And I bowled a couple more and I was like, oh, there's something off. And I found a way to just excuse myself. And I remember getting back in my Ford Fiesta, one of my favourite ever cars, actually, that old school Ford Fiesta. Bombed it back down the motorway. I was living with my boyfriend at the time. I got in, I remember just sort of saying, oh, my back's a bit dodgy. And I bent down to pick up the remote. And I just collapsed. And I never really walked properly from that point. It turns out I had like a pars defect in the spine, 2 prolapsed discs. There was all these problems, which I suppose I knew there was back problems, but they'd never quite been diagnosed, even when I saw physios, etc. Because of the stage, we weren't fully professional at that stage, so there weren't, how do you describe it? They weren't like sports science support. None of that. So we went through the slow NHS. They did MRI scans. I remember the doctor telling me that I might never play sport again, and the amount of damage that, I needed to be concerned about, like all sorts of things. And, when it was just the panic of the moment, I just was like, I'm going to lose sport. I couldn't sit up properly, so I had to leave university. I was studying chemistry at UCL. I left university for a year and pretty much just laid on my back for a year, if I'm honest. Like I tried a bit of treatment here, nothing was working. I tried a physio, nothing was working. So I just kind of went into a dark place, and I thought that was it. I thought my life was over. My brother that I spoke about earlier, that's the one that we are like firecrackers, but also supporters. I remember it was about a year in of, so I mean, I put on loads of weight. I was sitting in dark rooms. I was just eating angel cake and watching Homes Under the Hammer in our basement flat. And he called me one day and he just effed and blind. He was like, if you've given up, you've this, you've that, sort it effing out. And I was like, yeah, but Dom, the diagnosis and what the doctors is, he said, and he was like, F that. Are you going to just accept that as your reality, or are you going to try something different? Are you going to, and I was like, whatever. And between that and my mum had shoved all these motivational CDs from a guy called Tony Robbins. So I started he kind of sparked me mentally, and I started listening to these guru tapes.
Actually, Tony Robbins swears a bit as well, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. He doesn't mind an F-bomb or two, does he?
You got it both sides.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it was the two things at that time were my brother kind of shaking me up, and then listening to the tapes. And then I made goals, and I was like, I want to come back and I want to play for England. I want to get my master's in chemistry. And I wrote it up on the wall, and I kind of just stared at it for a few weeks. Nothing really happened. And then I decided to start thinking differently. And I started looking for alternative types of treatment, acupuncture, chiropractors, all that sort of stuff. And I finally found, after a number of trials, a chiropractor who just, the minute he saw me, was like, I can sort you out. I know exactly what's going on. He adjusted me. I started seeing him 3 or 4 times a week. And imagine going from not walking properly to like walking, and you're like, oh my God. So it's a process. It took 3 or 4 years. I'd love to say it was an overnight thing. It was, he got me back to walking first year properly, then running. And then by the time I was kind of ready to play sport, and my brother funded that as well, then the funding was available through, some university initiatives and sports initiatives. So that was it. I then got back. So it was tough, I have to say, mentally, to have a year pretty much laying on your back and just putting on weight and feeling hopeless is a dark place.
Yeah.
But equally, I mostly learned how to get out of a dark place. And that's a really good thing that I think is a powerful skill.
And as you were coming back, did you know that you would come back to cricket? Was that your driving force to kind of get you back and recovered?
Yeah, it was World Cup. And that's what my mum found the papers, because I used to write little goals down. I remember it was just thinking about, I want to be part of that World Cup. And it was 4 years away. It was the one we ended up going on to win in. So it was 4 years away from when I wrote it. And it seemed like a bit of a pipe dream, but it was also just the what if, the thought of what if I could get back? What if? That was the thing that drove me. And I knew if I was able to get back to playing to an international standard, I would have got my body back to a reasonable amount of health. So it was like a driver of like, can I work out and push myself? And, my back's still not perfect. Just I have to do a lot of work on it. But I'm still glad that I went through that process.
Absolutely. And when did you make your full debut for England?
My full debut, so 2007 was my first debut, even though we've got a cap for some stuff we played as junior kid, but that was my first proper debut, 2007, and the World Cup we won was 2009.
And you mentioned earlier that you were the first black woman to play for England. So when did you realise you were kind of making history? How did that feel at the time?
Yeah, it was weird. I remember, so our media manager at the time, a lady called Imogen, it was when we were in Chennai and we were out there, and she just said, Ebony, I don't know if it's me, but I think you might be the first black woman. I was like, nah. You're like, nah, it's 2000 and, it's 2007. And I'm thinking, I live in an environment which is all sorts of people. I was like, no, just check it. And then when she told me, I was half embarrassed, because I think they made a little announcement or sort of put it in the notes somewhere. And I remember just feeling a little bit embarrassed, because I kind of didn't feel like, oh, this is amazing. I felt like, why are there not more? I just, I wanted there to be more. So I was a little bit embarrassed. Like when people talked about it, I was like, yeah, I am. And I didn't sort of embrace it. I didn't own it. I think it's only now as an adult that I'm like, okay, look, this is cool. And it's something that I can leverage to say, look, let's bring more in. But at that time playing, when you're the only one as well, and like saying it in the team, it wasn't like everyone was like, oh, that's really cool. It would have just been a bit like, okay, why are they making a big thing? So it wasn't a thing that I embraced for a long time. I felt a bit awkward.
Wasn't celebrated by a media making noise about
not really. No, we weren't, and our media was kind of so limited then just to, did they win, did they lose, and that was it. There was no extra narrative or, attention at that stage. So, and Sophia Dunkley, who was the next player a couple of years ago. So it's been 11 years between me and her. So she's not regular in the team, but she played a couple of matches. That had a little bit more traction, which was nice just to see that progression, because the stories are now out there, and hopefully she can keep flying the flag.
And more to come.
Yeah, and more, a lot more, yeah.
And cricket doesn't really have a particularly good reputation in terms of its male-female balance in the past. But do you think Claire Connor's appointment as president of the MCC is a sign that things are changing in the right direction there?
Massively. I mean, her as an individual anyway has done so much for the game. I'm thinking as soon as she came in, she got a chance to shine contracts, which meant the girls could work part-time. Then she got it to professionalism. We see in laws. She's done so much. And I think if there was ever a space, and anyone who watched the final of the Women's World Cup in 2017 would have seen a packed stadium, but the pavilion where the members were was empty. And it was just, and you knew people were gagging for tickets. There were people outside the ground. And you're just thinking, if that was a men's World Cup final, it'd been absolutely rammed. And it showed, I guess, to the world who looked at the diversity of the crowd, the families, the kids. It was so beautiful. And then just to see that whole was kind of a reminder of where that sort of side of the game is. And what's good about Claire Connor's appointment is she knows how to go into a boardroom or a tricky environment and make change. She's done that. And I think, MCC making that, I think that's an important statement. Not only is she's credible in her own right, nothing to do with gender, she's credible in her own right, but also that's a point from them to show, I think, that they're thinking forward. They know they need change, and she would be the perfect person to do it.
Excellent. And just to go back, so 2009, rather, you mentioned you were obviously part of the winning team at the World Cup. Did you go into that tournament thinking you could win? Not you personally, but as a team?
But as a unit. Yeah, we did. Do you know what was really interesting? So when I made my debut 2007, we lost every single game in that tournament, except I think the last one when the results had been decided. And it was a really painful experience. I mean, the excitement of, oh my God, this is my first tournament. And we saw ourselves as a team that could compete, and we couldn't. It was a World Series, so it was Australia, New Zealand, India and us, who were meant to be the best 4 teams in the world, and we were completely outplayed. I just remember us being like, this is not good. Like, we're nowhere near where we need to be, and we got the World Cup in 2 years. We got no chance. Charlotte Edwards, our captain, was like, look, guys, we need to scrap and change everything. We had like a change of management. The players got shaken up. There were a few F-bombs at times in the changing rooms, everything you need to kind of shake up the environment. But what was so fascinating is how, like, the new lens of, we were like, right, we've got pretty much 18 months to get our acts together. And we all worked out exactly what our role was. And my role was interesting because I was at that stage an opening batter, because my bowling had kind of gone because of my back down the way. So opening batter, but also I knew I might not play every game. So I knew my role was also to bring energy. If I was not playing, I have to bring energy to the field, to the bringing on the drinks, to the supporting your teammates. So everyone got clear, right? Like, what is my role on the field? What is my role off it? What do we need to do to click? And we just kind of started finding this flow. And then we went on this unbeaten run up into the World Cup of nearly 20 games where it just clicked. So I think by that point, turning up to the tournament, we thought, do you know what? We can do this. We've worked out what we need to do. We've got the management right. We've got the roles and responsibilities right. And so we did believe it. We went there with a real belief. I would say it's one of the most surreal experiences for me, because I've been in work environments and team environments, etc. But it was almost, we got to the point that we were so clear and everyone believed and everyone was 100% like behind it, that there was no arrogance, but it was just like, it's going to happen. It's just going to happen. We're just going to do what we've been doing and it's going to work. So yeah, by the time we hit the World Cup, I think we knew it. And that whole year, World Cup, World T20 and the Ashes, we just went on a run. I mean, we fell off a cliff a little bit after that, but at least that year was incredible. It was really incredible.
Did you have psychologists working with you then in terms of mental attitude for the team as well?
Yeah, in and out. We had now it's, much more of a staple thing in the teams. That stage, it was, some players really embraced it. Someone like Claire Taylor, who's one of the greatest players that we've ever had in our women's game globally, but she was part of that team. She was someone who very much embraced it and she would seek it out. Some of us young players, we would do the occasional kind of group session, but a bit like, what is that? I mean, I've now become an obsessive about sort of mindset and psychology, but at that stage, you could take it a little bit and not take it if you didn't want to, and some players really embraced it. But now, you see how it's all evolved, and it's a very common thing that everyone embraces psychology now. But then it was a bit hit or miss. I was a bit like, what is this? And then when I saw us win, and I saw Claire Taylor do everything she did, and then she gave me a book, The Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. Okay. And after I read that, then I was like, oh, wow, there's like a whole nother world. And I think that just opened up the mindset for me.
And how did that win affect women's cricket in the UK at the time? So back in 2007.
Oh God, it's had so many impacts. I think before that, like I was saying, people might just report on a result or loss, like somewhere at the bottom of a website in a page. After that, it was the first time, I remember we made front pages on a couple of big newspapers, and it started to be talked about. I think the men weren't doing so well. So then it became not that we wanted to ever compete, but it came out, the women doing all right. What's going on with the men? And then that created a dialogue. Should we invest more? And what then from that moment happened was investment. I think people realized the country enjoyed the success of a female team, the team that could be very successful for a long time. And it's worth investing in it. And so, Claire Connor had not only a platform of who she was, but she had a platform of success to work with. Individually, it changed lives. Me and Isha Guha, who retired not long after that, all of a sudden having a World Cup title, it was like, why don't we get them on to commentate on a game or two, which has then turned into a whole career that's forged pathways. And it gives you credibility. Even if, I wasn't the best player in the world, people don't mind hearing from a woman if you've, won a World Cup. So it did change careers individually. So I would say everything has kind of progressed. And then the 2017 win at home, I think, was the complete flip point for real. Like, right, this is the next level in women's sport. I think that packed house at Lord's summed up to a lot of people what the potential is for the women's game.
Excellent. And you mentioned there, not long after you retired. So when did you know that your career was coming to an end? Yeah,
there's a bit of a funny story about this. Isha Guha has a lot to be to answer for. Yeah. So what happened is, a few things. I was having a bit of a bad time in the team around sort of 2010. I'd got injured, a really freak accident of just stepping back on a ball. Did something to my ankle, still went on tour, but in pain and just not enjoying the team environment at that point. And I ended up coming back and having an operation and I had about 6 months out the game. And it was the first time in my life I didn't just care about cricket. I was like, I've got friends. I've got family. I could go out and party. And I started to think about, it was the first time having 6 months off, just doing, normal stuff, that I had a chance to think about the real world. I started doing some work experience. I started working for a charity called Lord's Taverners part-time. And I guess I realized I could find fulfillment outside, like things that gave me the same amount. So I started thinking about it for a while, but I wasn't sure. And I remember calling Isha, we Skyped, she was in India. And I was like, mate, I think I'm thinking about retiring. I gave her this whole chat. She was like, no, stick with it, mate. Stick with it. You got to dig in another 5 years. You got this. I want you to stay. I want to play with you. So I was like, all right. So I was like, okay, Ebony, just dig in. Isha's told you to dig in. And then a week later, she called me up and she was like, mate, just so you know, there's an announcement coming out tomorrow. I'm done. I was like, what? You're out? And she was like, yeah, I'm done. I'm out. So then I was like, what? So she announced her retirement. And then I was like, right, if she's gone, I'm gone. And I was like, right, I'm out. So we retired within a week of each other. But I think it was coming. It was knowing that, I think that happens with an athlete. You're so single-minded for so much of your career. And then a lot of people I've spoken to, it's like this moment where you kind of a lens of you want to be doing other stuff. And it's the minute that your brain starts to kind of just disappear, you're in the nets and you're not quite concentrating. That never happened to me before. And I just knew it was time to go. I think I realized I wanted to do other things. And it was definitely the right moment for me.
And you started commentating. So was that initially on women's cricket and then across to men's?
Yeah, it was fun. So when I retired, I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a focus. And about a week or so later, I was on Streatham Common Station and my phone rang, unknown number. And it was like, hi, I'm Adam Mountford from BBC. I heard you're interested in commentary. And I was like, I don't remember telling anyone that, but yeah, I am. And it was like, you just blag it. Like, yeah, I'm well up. I've always wanted to do it. This is my number one dream. And, yeah, I remember the plan was only for us to do a couple of women's games that they were going to cover that summer. Me and Isha both did it with two guys, Charles Dagnall, Kevin Howes. And then I think they were so happy. They thought actually these women are all right. That they just put us straight in. We did the Australia men's ODIs that summer. There was no announcement, which I like. There wasn't a sort of here comes the women or anything like that, which I've seen in other parts of the world. It was just, we think you're good enough, give it a go, no training. And that was it. So I ended up sort of doing that. And then within no time, it was like men's cricket took over. I was doing 70, which I kind of like now, is 80% men's cricket, 20% women. So, I've been really fortunate to get the opportunity, and then it just seems to have just flown. So I'd say timing, when sometimes timing in life, we could have tried to make a career of it 10 years before, nothing would have happened. But I think timing, people were ready for different voices.
And it's interesting, you say in terms of having no training, so you just, with your expertise, you got there and away you went.
Yeah, I think there's a few things. I would say, look, I haven't really had much traditional training. I think my first proper session was about a year ago, and then I found out all the mistakes I've been making for the last 10 years. And I'm quite a kinesthetic learner. I like to go in and just listen and feel anyway. But what I would say is there's no doubt how much playing the game helps. Not every commentator is a player, but what I found is even in a tricky moment where I'm not sure what to say or I'm babbling for my words, you just say what you see, which gets you out of a hole for a little while. So that grounding in playing, I think, kind of gave us a little bit of breathing room, because you could at least just understand what was happening in the game quite well enough or put yourself in that position. You could say, right, that batter at the crease, I know what they're thinking. They're trying to work the ball between this, that becomes and then, you calm down and you realize, okay, I need to improve my broadcasting. You start to listen to others and their styles. I speak very quickly. I spend all my life trying to slow myself down, which has always been my challenge. But yeah, no training. And I think it depends on different people and different personalities, but I quite like it. I like just getting in and learning on the job.
And are you a different commentator now to where you were 10 years ago? If you listen back to those at all?
Oh, God, I heard. So BBC, there's a program and they pulled out my first ever piece of commentary, and my voice sounded like, "Hi, I'm Ebony." And it's just it sounded like a Smurf or something. So I think my voice has changed. It's definitely a bit fuller and a bit deeper. I can tell the difference when I'm confident, when I'm not, because when you're confident, you speak with a little bit more space, you emphasize your words. Whereas the early days where you're not sure, and I would still say that creeps in now when you're, starting a series or you haven't commentated for a while. I speak too quickly and you just flow through. So I think the difference is the depth in the voice. It's like I'll say things with a bit more authority, and I structure my points a little bit better now than I did then. But I still feel like there's so long way to go. And TV as well now is another dimension with talk back and directors in your ears and looking at different cameras and all that. There's definitely loads more to keep learning.
I love learning. It's good. It's great to keep developing and learning.
It is.
And obviously female commentators and pundits face some pretty brutal backlash, especially in sports like football. Have you faced much of that at all in cricket?
Luckily, I definitely have. I've had a number of comments around skin color, around gender, no one cares, get off the, whatever it is. But I would say it's 95% love. And also I've learned to sort of step back from social media, even though I'm active on it, like emotionally not get connected so much. So Alex Scott, for example, I know football, you read sometimes the tweets and you just think, but it's a different beast. It's more tribal football. And I think it attracts more, hate online, just generally. And I would say that's not even just to her as a female. You see it just through football. Whereas cricket, people do tweet badly, but it's just a slightly different style. If anything, people try and over-intellectualize. This week, this wasn't on Twitter, but someone wrote a piece and their comment about me and Isha is that we use glottal stops, so we don't pronounce our words the way they like. And I was just like, well, you can intellectualize the comment, but, it's different to, I would say, football, you see some real, just raw, nasty stuff. So I just do my best to ignore it. I'm much better. Sometimes I use filters. I don't know if anyone else does, but Twitter, you can sometimes filter just to see replies from people that you know. So if I've got a busy period and I just don't want to be bothered by dodgy comments, then I just turn it off so you just don't see it.
That's good to know that. Actually, we should let some of our younger female athletes we're working with at Women's
definitely
Sports
do
know
that.
about that too. Yeah. And you've mentioned there, but it's wonderful to see so many women in cricket media now. And I was lucky enough to interview Ellie Oldroyd last week. And I guess with her and then Alison, and you mentioned Isha and you in terms of the coverage for the latest test. Do you feel things are moving significantly in the right direction for women's media and commentary?
Massively. I think there was so much first of all, Ali, I think, was someone who, the producer who called us. I think Ali had spoken to them a while back and said, look, when these girls retire, get them in. The one thing I would say was I always knew, seeing Alison and Ellie before us in that space, even though I didn't know them personally that well at the time, but I'd seen them, it was kind of it's okay because there's a couple. Then, me and Issa on the analysing side, they were more on the presenting side at that stage. But I already felt possibility because I could see it. You kind of need to see something before you believe it. Then, you go forward to 2017 World Cup, and it was an all-women female team with high-quality broadcasters that are working in men's and women's cricket around the world. Mel Jones from Australia, one of the greatest broadcasters, male or female, full stop. Natalie Germanas from South Africa. When you look around a team, you're like, wow, this is a milestone. Not only are we an all-female team, but we're also a high-quality female team of women working across sport, just regardless of its gender. And that kind of mentally just cemented to me how far the game's come. I still think there's a long way to go. I would love to see more written journalists, female journalists. I think we've got some, and, Telegraph's women's sport doing so, but I'd love to see more. The only thing I would say is you still do walk into the media centre, and I think the commentary box has improved, but you still, when you look across the mass, the written journalist, there's a long way to go still there.
Absolutely. And would you like to do more outside of sport? So in terms of other entertainment and other programmes, is media your passion now?
Yeah, I really love media. I think, I don't know, I'm quite a bubbly person. Well, I don't know if I sound like it on a podcast today, but I genuinely am a bubbly person. I love being around people and I love creative things. I would love to move into other spaces. I think recently I've just sort of pitched a couple of documentaries which are linked to sport and some social issues, which, fingers crossed, I think they might get some traction. But then that to me is like an opening door of one, trying to help work together to put a program together. And then two, if you do that and you do sport and social, I love social issues and tackling challenges, then I'd love to do a documentary which maybe takes something a little bit further. So I'd love to move into it. I'm maybe less of a reality TV-ish.
You're not going to start dancing this Christmas or anything? Or...
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, you'd maybe consider it, but that's not my natural kind of direction. Yeah. But I think I'd love to get into programs and even actually behind the scenes a little bit on putting program ideas together as well.
And aside from the media work, you're obviously really active within the management of cricket as well. So can you tell me a little bit more about your role at Surrey?
Yeah, definitely. So given a role 5 or 6 years ago, director of women's cricket, it was really, great from our county that they just saw that women's cricket was growing, but they wanted someone to come in and have a real focus. So it was not only looking at the performance strand and how we can, improve the performance. By the way, I'm just going to say today that our Surrey women have won 2 trophies already this summer. I'm just so excited. So we just have to give a shout out to Hannah Jones, the captain, and everybody. But one was to get the performance up, but actually it was more to integrate women's cricket within the club, because we have a commercial team, marketing team, finance, etc. And women's cricket kind of sat over there on a shelf somewhere, and I think the club wanted us to bring it in. So it was a lot of, getting to know everybody across the whole club and get them caring about women's cricket. And it took a few years. It took a couple of years just to get it on everybody's lens. But now my role is much more hands-off around the women's game. I sit on the board, so then you can push agendas. For example, this year with COVID, we were able to talk about we want women's cricket to be the first back, and we were the first game that Surrey played male or female. We streamed it under lights at the Oval. It can bring up agendas around diversity. So yeah, that role has changed. It's much more sort of step back and strategic now, whereas when I first started, it was very much hands-on and trying to get everybody caring. But now we're looking at, how can we leverage and grow the women's game? And, I know we're both interested about commercialising the game, and I think there's a lot more we can do there as a club. So I'm focusing on some of those sort of lenses now.
And was elite coaching, that pathway, ever something you seriously considered?
Yeah, good question. I've done some badges and I started doing my level 3, but I don't have enough patience. I I get so emotionally involved. Whenever I sit on the bench, the players were just like, Ebony, shut up. Like, like you're just a bit too keen. I think it takes, coaching, and that's one thing, you got to know your strengths and weaknesses, right? I think coaching takes a certain level of patience, allowing someone to develop in their own space. And sometimes that means you can't fast track them. They've got to find their own way. And I get so frustrated because I just want to be like, right, just do this and do that. And I realize that that's not quite the best coaching mentality. I think I'm much better in a management role. But I think when I got to coaching, I just almost went too far and got too emotionally involved. And that's not quite the skill set you need. My best coaches have had this ability to kind of give you that little bit of insight when you need it, but then step back and let you grow. And I just struggled with that balance. I was just always I can help somebody one-to-one with ideas, which I've done. I think you could try playing this shot or that shot, but not so much day-to-day. It wasn't quite my skill set.
And what's your balance of your time? I guess it's different at the moment in COVID, but in terms of your media work, you're working with charities, you're working with a club, you're doing motivational speaking. So
how does it all work? The balance is non-existent. I think it's more of a lifestyle. So what I mean by that is when I started with Surrey stuff, I was already doing my media. So my media was my main focus. So we knew that I was starting. So we said, look, let's try 1 day a week in the office, then with, emails and stuff like that around. Whereas now I would just say it's a lifestyle. I mostly talk every day to say, I was on the phone a moment ago, I've got projects to write. It's just a lifestyle. I've never really been someone who clocks time. And I think that's a useful thing in the jobs that I do, because my media is maybe on paper 80% of my work, but then I would say my Surrey stuff might be 30%, and that's going over. Then you do a talk and then you do this. So I've had to learn to get my time managed better. As you might know, I've got someone who looks after my diary, actually, which helps me structure my life. Like I've tried to put things in blocks so I can get time to think about things or time to work around traveling and schedules. So I would say every job is mostly overdoing what it says on paper, and it's more of a lifestyle than a job. There's no sort of Monday to Friday and then you switch off for to-do days. I don't think I've ever had that. I'll be on tour in New Zealand writing strategy documents for Surrey or something like that. It's that sort of lifestyle.
And you have your own podcast, so The Art of Success, which I love, and it gave me lots of inspiration.
Oh, thank you for listening.
Starting this podcast too. So how much did you learn? I mean, I've loved doing these podcasts, but how much did you learn from talking to other people and some amazing guests you've had as well?
Yeah, some amazing people, everyone from people like Alistair Campbell to Richard Osman, who's TV, amazing producer from Endemol, athletes, all sorts. I learned so much. I think the first thing I learned about is like failure. I mean, we all know it, and we know that you got to be okay with failure. And I was so scared even just to start doing it. But then every time I listened to someone, you could just hear the failures through their story, but how they just kept going and going and testing. And that was resilience, really, is just going despite fears or despite. And I think it kind of reinforced for me, like, it's part of life. I also, the other thing, which, I did a little summary episode once, but strategy, I couldn't believe how strategic thinking so many people were. Alistair Campbell, well, he was a spin doctor as such, but he talked about how he viewed a lot of things, and it opened my mind to strategy. Richard Osman, sitting down and talking to him, and I realized how strategic thinking athletes were talking about how they built their careers. And it made me think about creating more space for planning and vision. Where do you want to go? What's the next step? What's further than that? And I would say also purpose. Like, everybody seemed to have a purpose behind what they were working towards. So I learned loads from doing it. And I would say actually just organizing yourself and getting it done, as I'm sure you know what it's like. And this technology is better than how I started doing it. It was definitely struggling, and like, how'd you get this done? And then, sorry, I forgot to press record. And, I'm sure you had those challenges, right?
Absolutely. Are you were planning to write a book at the time? Is that still something in the pipeline?
It's in the pipeline. I just don't know when, amongst all the things. I've got like a couple of like loose chapters. I need to give it to someone actually to kind of take the sections from the book with what they've done and kind of mirror it. I just haven't organized myself, but maybe I need to just get that back on the agenda. It's a to-do. It's a definite to-do. I just getting it done.
I'm going to brings you to your bucket list. I've heard about this amazing bucket list that you've got down. Has COVID slowed down your progress, or are you?
Oh man, yeah. I got one done just before I flew into London. Fiji, going to Fiji, island hopping was one of them. And I got that done. But I've been obsessed. I've been obsessed with my bucket list maybe 6 years. I've wrote out 83 things I think it is that I wanted to do. I did it. Do you know why I did it? I was ending my cricket career and I was realizing like I haven't been anywhere. I'd not even been to, well, I'd been to Paris like as a kid, but I hadn't really been anywhere. I hadn't done anything. I hadn't started learning anything. And so I just put loads of things on there. Golf. I wanted to, I want to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. I wanted to, so I just wrote a load of things that I want to do. I wanted to be in a flash mob, which I've done, was just so much fun. It gives me focus so that, I've got a to-do list that pops up once a month and just sort of says, right, what adventure are you planning? Yeah,
it's a documentary in itself, isn't it? We can just follow
maybe there
Ebony's bucket list.
Yeah, let's do it. I'd love to. Oh my God, that's a good idea. Right, writing that one down. But I think it's so important. I think it is important. We should definitely all just make sure we carve out time to do just those 1 or 2 things that are on our dream list.
I love it. And actually, I sort of heard that playing the drums is on my bucket list. And I've sometimes friends have said, why don't you just get started? And it's like, oh yeah, at some point in the future. So I love that you're doing that. How's that going?
Do you know, I would say that the thing that I'm learning to getting these things done is that you've just got to be in your eye line, right? So, working out, if I can't see my workout kit or the weights or my bike, which I use, I'm just not working. If it's hard work, you're just not doing it. So I would say get a little pad or kit and just chuck it in your living room or something where, like mine's right by my sofa, and you just walk past it. So then every now and then you're like, oh, I might just jump on. So it's so much fun. And I go down to proper drum studios. I've got like all the proper gear and play maybe every couple of weeks, just stress relief of just hitting things as loud as possible. It's the best fun.
And have you shared your bucket list anywhere? Is there anywhere people can go
on my website? Yeah.
Oh, is it good? Sorry, I should know that, shouldn't I then?
No, it's all right. I don't know if it's on a few tabs in, but yeah, and I think I've crossed off. I might need to do an update, but I've crossed off quite a few. So I've maybe done about 20 or so. So yeah, if anyone's interested, go and check it out.
Yeah.
Someone actually, so I'd wanted to have a breakfast on the Shard, and someone saw it and just got in touch and was like, "Oh, I just looked at your bucket list. Come along." So if anyone can help me,
I'll put that in the show notes as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Along. Inspiration or for suggestions. And so who in your career do you think are the people you've most looked up to in, I guess, your broad working life? Really, who's inspired you?
That's really good. I'm actually really inspired at the moment. I mean, it sounds a bit corny, but my chief exec and chairman at Surrey, they are, how do I describe them? They have pushed me to grow. So learning, how do you manage your time better? How do you think strategically better? What's so nice about working with them is how strong their values are. They're very caring about people and progressing people, and if you go to them about women's cricket, it's in their DNA to want it to be the best it can be. They are so forward thinking, and so I think I'm always around them whenever I work with them, just soaking up how they go about business. The club has been very successful historically, and from a commercial perspective, and I think I just listen and soak up from them how they go about business, how they go about building teams, and just the values that they drive that with.
What are their names?
Sorry, Richard Gould and Richard Thompson. So they're our chief exec and chairman. So I'm constantly soaking up and learning from them. I think I'm always motivated just generally, like someone like Denise Lewis, who I remember watching her as a kid win the heptathlon, and then she's become a friend now. And she's just always got energy. She's always, she looks younger than 20, she looks 20, yeah, even though she's got 4 kids. She's maintained an amazing career. She's always got something to say on important issues. So someone like her, I'm just always looking to not only was I inspired as a kid, sometimes you meet your heroes and they're just not what you think they are. She was everything you thought. And I don't know, she's just got so much energy for life that I think, right, Denise, you're inspiring me. I'm on that wavelength. And then I would say I don't know, there's so many people who've inspired me throughout my journey, like I mentioned, Jenny Washtrack, my one-to-one coach, people like that. But I would say people like I said, now it's about sort of the next level and what I'm trying to achieve strategically. And I think I'm soaking up from people like Richard and Richard about those sort of things.
Excellent. You've clearly had massive success. So just finally, what advice would you give to young women coming through and wanting to progress in the sports sector today?
God, I would still say believe in yourself because, and maybe people, it sounds so corny, but I've done a lot of work. I said I didn't believe in psychology before. Now I have a session every 2 weeks for myself as a growth thing, because I think what I've realized is the more I've unlocked belief in myself, the more you put yourself forward for opportunities, the more when you get the opportunity, you maximize it, the more you grow in confidence. And I think just because of history of the world, and biases and all those sort of things, women, we still have a little bit of work to do for ourselves to do that. So I'll say two things. I would say, one, build your confidence, and the other is always work on a good environment. I think you could be a really good, smart person, but if you're in the wrong company or you're in the wrong team or you're in the wrong environment, it's not going to work for you. Everything that's around you can double or triple your success. I could have had a vision for women's cricket, but been at the wrong county and they didn't value it, and we wouldn't have been able to make a difference. So 2 things: work on building yourself up and your confidence, and that will always grow. And then the other is just get around really good people and good environments.
So much wise advice from Ebony. I've no doubt we'll all be feeling more confident in our approach to life and work having listened to her. If you're enjoying the Game Changers, it would be great if you could take a moment to rate and review the podcast. These ratings make a really big difference to how the podcast is ranked and how likely other people are to find the stories of these incredible women. Thanks again to Sport England for supporting this series of the Game Changers, and also to Sam Walker, my rather brilliant executive producer. You can find out more about all 41 of my incredible guests from this and the previous series at fearlesswomen.co.uk, or come and say hello on social media, where you'll find us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at Sue Anstis or at The Game Changers. Next week, I'll be talking to Katie Sadlier, General Manager of Women's Rugby at World Rugby. A former Olympian in the pool, Katie led the transformation of New Zealand's high-performance sports system, and in 2016 received a Lifetime Achievement Award for her contribution to sport in New Zealand over the past 25 years. Please be sure to subscribe now so you don't miss this episode.
On the day that they signed off on the 8-year strategy, we changed the governance structure of World Rugby and brought on 17 women directors. So from 0 to 36%, just like that. And so when people say things like that can't happen, they certainly can happen.
The Game Changers. Fearless Women in Sport.